I don't have anything to base this off of, but I think that in the mid-1970s, George Lucas had a crisis of faith. Again, there's no evidence I have for that. It's just my belief that he was working through his own feelings of belief and what he felt about the world. Because when he was working on Star Wars is, at its heart, a film about belief. You have a main character who has not heard very much about the wide world, and he finds out about this faith, this manifestation of will that permeates reality in a very Eastern philosophy way that is part of all living things. He meets someone who can tell him a lot about it, Obi-Wan Kenobi, and he meets someone who does not believe in it, Harrison Ford, Han Solo. He learns about this from a wise mentor, someone who is an expert and who has been persecuted for this belief. He meets someone who does not believe in this, an arrogant swashbuckler who feels that all you need is your own wits, and that anything he can't explain, it's just luck, bad or good. He learns about an enemy, although learns very little about him. I don't believe Luke really has any perception of who Darth Vader is throughout the first film, but learns about an enemy who is also a believer in this same faith, although their version of it is twisted and wicked. He knows that this wicked person was a former apprentice of Obi-Wan's, so he knows that there's some connection there to his mentor, and that he is essentially an attempt at a second chance of learning more about this faith. Then the wicked villain kills the mentor, which is of course devastating. But this is not the end. Luke then begins to hear the mentor's voice where he goes, still giving him advice, still mentoring him from beyond the grave. And he didn't even have a body. His robe just dropped to the ground and it was empty. So something is going on here, something more than he is able to understand or explain. At the end of the film, he's making the Death Star trench run, and he still hears the voice. He hears the voice again tell him just to have faith, just to believe. And at that point, Luke turns off his targeting computer, and he's able to perform the shot that no one else could. And it wasn't luck, and it wasn't skill, although he certainly did brag about his skill later. It was faith that was able to make this happen. So what do we know? We know that we're telling a story about faith and about someone finding new belief and rejecting their old belief, and it being tested by other people. It's a very small, intimate film, so there's not a lot of people who he talks to about it. Really, the only conversations he has about the Force are with Obi-Wan and with Han Solo. As far as we see, it never even gets brought up around Leia. We also have the conversations with Darth Vader, though. Darth Vader talks a lot about it with Tarkin, he talks a lot about it with the other members of the Imperial Council, and he talks a lot about it with Obi-Wan, or a little bit about it with Obi-Wan. And from this, we get an understanding. We get an understanding that there is this belief system in place in the world that few people believe, but has actual ways that it affects reality. We see the Force used in three ways. The first is that Obi-Wan is able to affect the mind of a stormtrooper and convince him to do something he would not normally do, to let them pass without inspection. The second is to sense things they cannot see. We see this with the probe on the Millennium Falcon. We see this with Darth Vader and Obi-Wan. I believe they both sense each other, but definitely Darth Vader senses Obi-Wan very strongly throughout that entire film. And the other way we see it is that Darth Vader, and only Darth Vader, uses it to physically affect the world around him by force choking a underling. That's it. No one lifts a lightsaber, no one lifts an X-Wing. It's those three things. And obviously later films will then go on and add other things like the telekinesis aspect and the force lightning and being able to communicate across vast distances. That happens in Empire, is when you start to see people communicating across vast distances without actually being in the same room. But the first film gives us a framework. This is a fringe belief. There are very, very few, and Vader's called a lot of things. He's called a sorcerer, they're called wizards and hermits. This is not looked upon as a scientific thing. So what do we know? We know that this is a world that has some element of skepticism. This is not a world with a lot of belief. We know that this is a world where this faith structure is not only not the dominant, but it's not even believed by anyone, really. We have three main characters in the film who believe in this religion, and one of them learned about it during the course of the movie. That's two people. That's two people who were already practicing faith members when the story begins. That tells us about the power structure as well. Whatever people did believe in this, they're gone. And the overwhelming force, lowercase force, that is suppressing that is the Empire. That tells us that there is an empire that is controlling the will, or at least the information, of the people. So now we know who our villains are. They are not just one person, not just one evil sorcerer. Because that would be interesting if they were just going to essentially a wizard's tower or the castle of this bad guy Darth Vader. But that's not what the story is about. It's not about this one bad guy. He's just a part of this system. It's about this evil empire that is trying to keep this Eastern-style religion from reaching the more advanced, modern world. It's about this wicked government that is trading in human lives and performing atrocities on unsuspecting, innocent people for their own political capital, a film that took place in far, far away, but happened to get released shortly after the Vietnam War. It's about this evil empire, this evil government that suppresses a Eastern-style belief. George Lucas is telling us that this is a world without faith. The only chance that anyone has to learn about faith is from word of mouth, from some other person, by going away from what the status quo believes, whatever it is that they believe, which we don't really get a sense of what religion is like for most people in the Republic, or the Rebellion, or the Resistance, or any of it. I believe we get one more May the Force be with you from someone in the Rebellion, but he doesn't even have a name in the film. He's not a major character. So that could mean anything. That could mean God bless or Godspeed. I would hear someone say Godspeed and not necessarily believe that they believe in the Christian God, because that is such a part of the common phrase. Or it could be that this is their way of thumbing their nose at the Empire. It's their way of saying, we will say, may the Force be with you, regardless of whether the Force is real or not, regardless of whether we believe it. We know it's something they don't want us to say, so we're going to say it. Also, it could just be that it's a catchy phrase and they wanted to get it in the film one more time before we hear it from Han Solo. Give him a chance to hear it somewhere else, not from Obi-Wan and not from Luke, but from a third party, to show, all right, he's not just listening to Obi-Wan, but he's also not just believing himself anymore. Now we have a theme, and that theme can be used to establish the world building, because how likely is it that Luke's going to run into another Jedi? Pretty unlikely. And in fact, we see in the next film that he has to go seek out one more. It's not just he's just going to cross paths with someone who's a Force believer. This is a very, very fringe religion. So what we know is that people cannot do extraordinary things. The things that we see Luke do, Han says, yeah, luck. That was luck. Now we know something about the world. People cannot do extreme, extraordinary things. And that's incredibly useful to know, because this is a world with aliens in it. There are no borders when the Star Wars begins. There are no lines. There are no walls. The bumpers have not been set up yet. And in fact, the bumpers really get brought further and further in as future films get made. But at the beginning, the bumpers are way out here. We don't know anything. We have bought in on Star Wars, the weird, wacky fantasy film. So as the film goes on, it has to tell us, okay, the Force exists, but only a few people are aware of it, or only a few people know anything about it. Okay, that tells us this. That tells us that this is a small, modest group of people, a small faith, and that they are oppressed. It also tells us that the Empire, and this is not surprising if you know anything about politics, are hypocritical, because they are working with someone who is a member of the Force faith, the Jedi, I suppose. Later on, we will learn the term Sith. He is an evil version of what the Jedi are. We know that they are working with him while simultaneously suppressing anyone knowing about the Force, keeping anyone from being aware of it by slaughtering anyone else who practices it. So now we go in further. We know something else about the Empire. Now we know what they're willing to do to control narrative. And that comes into play through other ways as well. As we meet the Princess Leia and the destruction of Alderaan, we are told explicitly that the Empire is trying to control people, and they're trying to control the narrative, but they're going to fail. So now we know something else about the world. People have hope, but not a lot of it. People are desperate for hope. People are looking for something that will empower them. And now we can extrapolate that again and look at the representation of how that theme manifests on Luke. Luke wants to escape his boring, ordinary life. And this is something we see a lot of. There's a weird evolution in George Lucas's writing in the first 3 films he made. In the first film he makes, THX 1138, our main character is afraid of what the outside world might be like. I think there's a lot of fear and uncertainty and the feeling that he may not be prepared for whatever is out there. There's curiosity, certainly, but there's also a fear that what if it's more than I can handle? Then in American Graffiti, we have one character played by, it's not Ron Howard, I think it's Richard Dreyfuss's character. Richard Dreyfuss's character is feeling that fear. What if I can't make it at college? What if I'm not able to cut it? What if I'm not good enough? But the other character, the Ron Howard character, he's ready for it. He's greedy for it. He wants to see that outside world. And the two of them have differing ideologies. And by the end of the film, spoilers for a film that came out, I'm going to do some math and it's going to be bad and scary, so I'm not going to do the math. Came out a long time ago. By the end of the film, those characters switch positions so that Ron Howard stays and Richard Dreyfuss has felt the confidence now he needs to go out and go to college. Which honestly, feels like those decisions should have been made well before the first day. Maybe it was just simpler times back then. But again, that works more narratively than it does mechanically. We get that evolution, and then the next evolution of it is Luke Skywalker. There's no more of that fear, that resistance. There's no more of that uncertainty. He wants to leave his home. He is feeling anxious. He's feeling bounded. He's feeling restrained and restricted, and he is trying to break free of it. Now, there's still a little resistance, because that's good storytelling. When he's given the opportunity, there's that uncertainty again. There's that uncertainty again. It manifests again when he says, I don't know. I can't just leave. I have responsibilities. I have things I can do. I can't just leave. But Luke is more than just a manifestation of what George Lucas is going through in his life, living in a small town and going to a very, very accomplished filmmaking school and becoming the star student and starting to feel a lot of trepidation about what his film career would be like, and then finally feeling he has to make it, and if he doesn't make his mark, he's going to drown, and he's not going to be able to do what he wants to do. Beyond all that, Luke is a manifestation of the world because he feels hope. He's one of the few people in the film who does. He's feeling hope, and it's getting ground down by him. And then Obi-Wan comes along and opens the door and says, it is okay for you to feel what you're feeling. Here is why. This is the Force. This is the thing. This is how you feel. So that's a theme. That's the main theme of Star Wars. And from that, we extrapolate what Star Wars is. Star Wars is a world with magic, but barely. Star Wars is a world where the magic system exists, and it's robust, and it's powerful, and the Force can be used to accomplish amazing things, but it's not. Because of this, because of this, because of this, because of all the boundaries we're putting around it, because not everyone can feel it, because the bad guys are after it, because the world is being ground down. The people are being ground down so they don't feel like they have hope. They still feel a little, but the Empire, right now, is winning. And Luke has to take the lessons of Obi-Wan and the strength of Leia and change the world. The theme of Star Wars, it's not just a hero's journey. The theme of Star Wars is about finding faith. And they establish a world where that is a revolutionary act. They establish a villain that is anti this religion, presumably many religions, but at least the only one we see in Star Wars, or the main one we see in Star Wars. That religion is not allowed, is unacceptable according to the Empire. Think about your story. Think about what you're writing. What theme are you trying to express? In my D&D games, I do a lot of stories about the old world versus the new world. People who believe that we should return to the way things used to be, the way they perceive things used to be. People want to push things forward. That's also how I view the real world. I think that that is the main drive, at least the one that I respond most to, about the world writ large and about politics that we see in the real world. That's the one that I think manifests the most, at least in American politics. People who want to return to a perceived status quo, and people who want to push forward to what they view as a more optimistic future. So I do a lot of stories about that, and based on that, I do a lot of world building that establishes, okay, there was an old world that people thought was better, and then something happened. There was an apocalypse, a cataclysm, and now people want to get as close back to that as they can, but other people are just trying to make it in the new system and trying to make that better and trying to undo perhaps what caused the apocalypse, to prevent another one, or do whatever they can to make sure that whatever led to this crisis that happened during the status quo doesn't happen again. So they want to push things forward and maintain a new trajectory. These days, that feels more and more topical and more revolutionary, a concept that these are, I think, one of the two big ideological differences in my storytelling. In my stories, I think old and new are the two big ideological extremes. Status quo, or perceived status quo, versus revolutionary future. And it doesn't always necessarily mean that the good guys are for this and the bad guys are for this. It depends on the story, it depends on the individuals. But those are, I think, the two big extremes that I'm the most interested in. And that manifests a lot in my writing, so it manifests a lot in my world building. I create factions and religions and countries and cultures where the people in charge have one of these two things in mind. Either they are trying to maintain and hold on to what they think is their standing, their station, or they're trying to push forward and gain status and station that they did not have. Because that's really what drives politics in general, is standing and station. So then you get the enemies of those factions. Well, where do they fall on the spectrum? Which ones are they more leaning towards? If the government of a town is pushing for new revolution and new leadership, the adversaries to that are going to be here. They're going to be trying to maintain what they used to have and return to what they think they've lost. Vice versa, if bad guys are trying to take advantage of the new status quo, the good guys are trying to keep that from happening and try to return to a more safe and protected society. That is how I use that theme in my world building. What about you? I mean, there's a million ways we can interpret this. This is just scratching the surface, but this is something I think about a lot. Your world has themes in place, whether you realize it or not. And what you want to talk about and the themes that are important to you are going to manifest in interesting ways in the world. If you can start to be aware of that, you can make something really interesting, because you can make a world where the themes are really explicit and profound. At least I hope so. That's the video. If you liked it, you can leave me a comment and hit a like button. That means that I know that you liked it. And if you want to see the videos when they come out, then hit the subscribe button and ring the bell, because that's how you know. I don't know why I pointed up here. That's not where the bell is. It's down there somewhere. If you ring the bell, that's how I know that you want to see more videos, and that really helps me and the channel get noticed. Thank you so much for watching. I love you, Victoria.